Hello and welcome to this audiobook. Today we bring you the short story Afterglow by Neil Fernandopulle. This is a deeply moving story about war, heroism, sacrifice, and the silent loneliness that follows public praise. Through the character of Nimal, a young soldier who returns to his village after losing his leg in the war. The story explores the emotional cost of being called a hero. As you listen, imagine a quiet village at sunset, a peaceful tank bund, fields waiting for rain, and a young man standing between honor and emptiness. Now, let us begin Afterglow by Neil Fernandopulle. Afterglow, the broad, elevated bund of his village tank always had an attraction which Nimal could not resist. Almost every evening of his boyhood was spent there. Since recently he'd begun to go there again. He stood in front of the mirror and buttoned on the shirt that his sister had washed and ironed for him. After combing his hair, which was still the short military crop, he took his crutches and stood straight in front of the mirror, chest forward, chin up. All he needed to do was stand straighter. The crutches made it difficult. Outside the house, his sister's 2 children were playing, and his mother sat at the end of the veranda, diligently picking paddy from the rice she was to cook tonight. She lifted her gaze from the winnowing fan and looked at Nimal as he stood near the door. She smiled and went back to her work. Since lately his mother had become quiet. He stepped out onto the footpath leading out of their garden. The ground was hard and dry, ideal for a walk. As he neared the road, his sister's husband came into sight. There was a leather filing bag in one hand and a plastic bag full of provisions in the other. "Going somewhere?" he asked as he approached. Nimal nodded. "To the tank bund." His sister's husband smiled, almost laughed, and continued. He worked in the bank in town. If not for him, Nimal would have had to bear the burden of providing for his mother and sister. Nimal stood there, watching him as he walked on, towards their house. He is a good man, Nimal thought, as he watched how his children ran up to their father and hung on his arms, and his wife came up to him and smiled and took the bag of provisions from him. Nimal waited and watched. Then someone shouted, "Going somewhere?" Nimal turned around. An old man with a short white beard sat in his bullock cart, waiting for his answer. "Yes, to the tea boutique," he said, coming up to the cart. "Get in." The man smiled, a broad, toothless smile. "Are you going there?" Nimal asked. "No, but I'll take you." He offered so obligingly that Nimal couldn't refuse. He heaved himself up into the cart and it ambled on slowly. The old man turned around and looked at him several times. "Are you from around here?" Nimal asked after spending most of the short journey in silence. "No, I only bring my cart through this village. I have heard about you. People in the tea boutique have told me. I wanted to do something for you." He got off and hurried to the rear of the cart and offered his hand to Nimal. It was a thin, wrinkled hand, offered in help to Nimal's sturdy hand. "Thank you," he said after his foot landed on the dry earth, and the rubber ends of his crutches wobbled as they took the rest of his unbalanced weight. The old man smiled and nodded almost reverently. Nimal balanced himself on the edge of the road and watched till the cart had gone far. He didn't know what to feel. He knew he had to be happy, that people appreciated what he had done. The tea boutique was never crowded, except on Nimal's first few visits to it after returning from the war. Everybody wanted to hear everything that he had to say about how the landmine exploded under his foot, and about how they had to, amputate almost half his leg because it was only a mass of flesh. They wanted to know so much and listened so intently about that distant land, those distant people. They relished all the stories he told them with a display of horror and disgust. The whole village marveled at all this, quite determined to make a hero of him. They did all they could to help him. After all, as the chief monk in the temple said, no one from their village had been to war since Kapatippala Nilam sought to oust the British in the infancy of their rule. As he entered the small shop, someone stood up and offered him a chair. "What will you have?" the owner asked from behind the counter, his plump face appearing between two hanging bunches of bananas. "The usual," Nimal said. "Plain tea with a lot of sugar." "Anything to eat?" the man asked. "No," he replied quickly. He couldn't take anything, knowing that they wouldn't take money from him. People were so generous even after all this time, as if they owed him an eternal debt. "So, where are you going?" an old man asked from near the door, more out of habit than out of curiosity. "To the tank bund," Nimal said, and looked up at the man's face. The old man smiled and laughed a little inside. He knew how much Nimal liked going there, how he and his friends spent their childhood there. It was then that a motorcycle stopped near the boutique, and its rider walked in and hastily ordered several things over the counter. "What are you doing here?" the man asked, turning to Nimal. He knew Nimal was a frequent visitor here. Nimal smiled over his cup of tea. He was an old friend, a special friend. Nimal looked into his eyes as he approached. He looked happy. Nimal knew he was doing well, and he had all the more reason to be happy. "I'm going to the tank bund." "Why, you want to join me?" he said, and waited, giving his friend time to answer. The rider laughed and patted him on the shoulder. "Those days are over. You know us married people. You're lucky not to be married. Look at all the freedom you have." He picked up his provisions and walked out, still smiling. Nimal held his cup of tea in both hands, in preparation for what he was going to say. The motorcycle engine started and roared loudly. His fingers clenched the cup. "My regards to Chandini," he shouted as the motorcycle turned to leave. The rider stopped midway in his turn and nodded and was gone. Nimal quickly looked around at the faces that surrounded him. After all, Chandini, it was well known, was his girl. Everyone knew that she couldn't marry him after what had happened. They all knew. They all understood, at least now, that it was not fair by the girl. No girl wants to start her married life with a handicap like this. Chandini had spent so much time and tears trying to explain that to him. There was no need for it. He kept telling her that he understood perfectly what she felt and the predicament that she was in. The cup landed on the table at last, and Nimal couldn't sit there anymore. He wanted to continue his journey. The money he offered for the tea was not taken. "It's nothing," the man behind the counter said, with a wave of his hand. A gush of evening breeze blew over his face as he stepped out. The tank bund lured him even more strongly now. He quickened his pace and tried not to think of the people who passed by, or the people in the boutique. They had done so much for him. He was a hero, a real hero. Everybody was so generous. He felt guilty. Sometimes he wanted to do more for them, to deserve this respect, this honor. Sometimes he wished he could have died for these people. Death is such a small price to pay. He remembered those words as he approached the temple and saw the very man who had said them to him. Life is but a line drawn on water. The chief monk had already seen him approach. and he came down the flight of steps to talk to Nimal, knowing that he found it difficult to climb steps with his crutches. "How are you?" the monk asked. "Fine," Nimal nodded quickly. The monk laughed, a pleasant pattern of wrinkles appearing over his face. "You have no foot and you say you are fine. Ask any man who comes this way who has both feet, and he'll have 1,000 complaints." Nimal couldn't help admire the felicity of the observation, and the depth of this man's thought. "It isn't a leg or a hand that makes a man happy, my son." He came down to a more serious tone. "It's the merit that one obtains." He nodded and looked very straight at Nimal. "Yes," was all he could mutter. "We are having our annual council meeting tomorrow," the monk continued. "I want you to be there, to represent the youth of our village." Nimal was not happy. He knew so little about these things. Meetings, debates, speeches were never his plus points. He just couldn't accept. "You'll be there?" the monk asked. Yes, he heard himself say. He couldn't say anything else. Loku Hamaduro had done so much for him. He had encouraged Nimal to join the army and showed him how important it was and why he should go to war. And when Nimal returned, the monk did so much to collect money to buy him crutches and clothes, and even gave money to his family. There was hardly a sermon he preached in those days that did not mention the courage Nimal had shown and the sacrifice he had made. Nimal, after all, was only a common village boy. Loku Hamaduro had made him what he was now. "So where are you going? To the tank bund?" the monk asked, and Nimal nodded. Good, he said. "It's good to spend some time on your own." He started climbing the steps. The wind billowed his saffron robes around him as he ascended steadily. The bund was not far away. Nimal wanted to be there, and hastened his stride till he reached the old familiar rock on which he always sat. There was a spacious view of the whole area. The tank, with the wind playing on its surface, had little ripples of light and shadow dancing all over, and beyond it were the fields. They were dry, waiting for the monsoon. This was the time Nimal and his friends liked best. They were dry enough to play cricket on, just like the village children who played there even now. It was one vast cricket ground, acres and acres of it. Beyond the fields were the distant hills. They were always green, and sometimes echoed the children's voices. He looked at all that and tried to take it in one eyeful. Everything at once, like a child grabbing all his toys, afraid that someone would take something away. Here was all that he ever treasured. In this water, in these fields, in these hills, were his best moments. He braved in the cool air, drawing into him the scent of the dryness, the uncrowded, unaffected nothingness. He wanted to lie down and bury his face in the bosom of the green hills, in the warmth of all that was untouched by knowledge of the outside world. They were friends. There were 4 of them. Blood brothers they called themselves. This is where they used to meet, on this rock every evening. There were times they vowed that they would never leave the village, and that they would meet here every evening for the rest of their lives. Boyhood dreams. Boyhood slips away with such stealth, such suddenness. 2 of Nimal's friends left the village and hardly came back at all. Nimal left too. He too broke his promise for a while. But he's back, to stay forever. Every evening he hopes that at least one of them would be here. He kept his promise. But there's no one else. They are all busy with their lives. Nimal is above all that. He has nothing to worry about. He has only got to enjoy being a hero. The hero that the people made of him. He only has to bask in the aura that they weave around him with their praises. their generosity, their unending gratitude. He was only a boy, like the boys playing on that field. He knew nothing of the war. He didn't want to know, till he was told. Today he is a hero. They wouldn't let him be anything else. A hero cannot do an ordinary job. A hero cannot struggle to make a living. He cannot tell you how much pain he is in. A hero cannot ask for more. He didn't want more than this. He wanted less. He wanted nothing. The children were going away after their cricket match. The hills turned from green to yellow to red. This was the time he liked best. He sometimes used to sit here with Chandini and watch the sun go down. He would rest his head on her lap and look up at the darkening sky. He would press his face into her soft belly and close his eyes and imagine. Maybe they did the wrong thing in promising never to leave each other. Maybe she did the wrong thing in promising to be his, and his alone, even if he came back from the war in a coffin. It was all an illusion, like the red fire on those hills, soon to disappear into a blackness. She promised, and he believed. Here he was, alone in the darkness. The hills loom above like distant ghosts. And he, so small in the immensity of the land. So little, so useless. The injured water bugs struggling on the surface, raising ripples in the vastness of the water's placid face, neither drowning nor recovering. Feverish, concentric waves moving outwards, waves of discontent. So small, and so impudent as to disturb the comfort of a people's conscience. He stood up. He stood straight, the way they had taught him to. He wanted to scream. He wanted to explode like that landmine, so that they'll hear him. Everyone, the hills, the fields, the water, the sun, the sky, everyone, so that they would all see him, standing there, in the fading light, so that they would look at him, their hero. The evening wind blew in gusts over his face, as he looked up at the vestiges of daylight and the first stars. It was time to go. He knew he would be here again tomorrow. You have just listened to Afterglow by Neil Fernandopulle. This story reminds us that heroism is often a burden. Behind the medals and admiration, there can be loneliness, regret, and unspoken pain. Nimal is celebrated by his village, respected, honored, and praised. Yet inside he struggles with loss, broken dreams, and the quiet feeling of being trapped by the image others have created for him. The fading sunlight over the hills reflects his own afterglow. A moment of brightness slowly disappearing into darkness. Through this story, we are invited to ask, what does it truly mean to be a hero? Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this audiobook, please like, share, and subscribe for more Sri Lankan and English literature stories. And don't forget to comment your thoughts below. Until next time, happy listening.